Blog Talk Radio. Opening music provided by bensound.com. Welcome everyone to today's Earth Energy Forecast Show on this Tuesday, August 25th, 2020. Thank you for tuning in today, or if you're listening later to the podcast, and I am your host, Joan Cerio. How are you doing today? What is your world like on this Tuesday? Well, we're almost to the end of August, and we're fast approaching the end of summer of 2020. It's hard to believe, but we've made it this far. And what a year. Well, not only have we had the pandemic, but we've also had economic crisis. We've had in a lot of places in the world, not only here in the U.S., but racial division and protests, riots. There's a lot of upheaval right now. And there's a lot of upheaval in our government here. There's Brexit in Europe. So we're going through a major crisis, a very chaotic time in our history. And through everything, and I believe this, that there's always a gift in everything. There's gifts. So what can we glean out of this time? What type of gems can we get through this? And I think that's something that each one of us really has been working on since the big lockdown in February, March of this year. We've been forced to go within, to slow down, stop, get quiet, listen to ourselves, listen to others, listen to that still small voice, and really ask what our heart wants. And that's what it's about. And so for those that have been on this merry-go-round of work and come home and take care of the kids and eat and go to bed and get up and work and da-da-da-da-da, and it goes on and on and on, we had a breather. We stopped. We had a chance to really look at our lives and to ask ourselves, is this what we want? Is this the kind of world we still want to live in? And so today we're going to continue on with this theme that I've had in the last couple of weeks here about the raising of consciousness and some of the gifts that we're getting out of this time, because that is one of the huge gifts we're getting out of this time of change and shift. So today we're going to talk about the relationship between personal and planetary awakening through crisis. And I'm going to bring on Catherine G. Lucas, who herself has gone through her own crisis and has found her gifts through that crisis. And she's going to talk about her story a little bit today. A former university professor, Catherine G. Lucas, is the author of 4 books on how to move successfully through crisis and come to a new place of flourishing. She is the founder of the Spiritual Crisis Network, a UK non-for-profit, a mindfulness trainer. She has been through profound crisis herself and fulfilled the potential it held for her by going on to become a published author, an authority on spiritual emergency, as well as an international speaker. She has supported many individuals during 15 years of work in the field Catherine is now offering her new signature system, the Quantum Quest from Crisis to Calling in 3 clear steps to online groups, conscious enterprises, organizations, and non-for-profits. She is passionate about helping individuals and leaders step into their soul's calling following crisis, whether that be personal or the pandemic. Her media appearances include BBC Radio and Time Warner TV. Catherine lives off-grid in Catalonia, Spain, with her husband, Swithin Fry. Her websites are co-creatingourfuture.world and Catherine-G-Lucas.com. Here's Catherine. Well, welcome to this show, Catherine. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. I mean, I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you for the opportunity because right now, we're in this kind of situation. I'm excited to be sharing what I feel is going to be really valuable and helpful for everybody listening. So, yeah, thank you.
Yes, I think this is really valuable. I've been doing a lot of shows on consciousness raising lately, and of course about the pandemic and how it's affected us, and I think this is just so timely. So I'd like to start with where this all began with you, pretty much. If you could tell us about your story and your experience with awakening with your consciousness through these crises that you've experienced in your own life.
Yeah, and what I thought, Jen, it's kind of a long story, and obviously, I kind of want to kind of keep it brief and keep it to a nutshell. So I thought actually what might work really well is, if I kind of speak to, what we're talking about here, like, an awakening of consciousness that kind of triggers a huge crisis. And then as I'm kind of speaking to that, I can kind of bring in bits of my story that kind of help to kind of illustrate, what I'm talking about, rather than just kind of going through my story from A to Z, which, is difficult for me to manage time-wise.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's fine. That's great. That'd probably be better for our audience anyways then. So what really is happening with this pandemic? We're getting a lot of gifts. I mean, yes, it's challenging and all, but I do see the gifts. And so start us off with what can we glean from this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do want to start at the personal before we go to the planetary and the kind of pandemic, so that people can kind of follow kind of my kind of the kind of the thinking, if you like. So when we go through this crisis at the personal level, and I'm guessing that some of you listening today are familiar with the term spiritual emergency and the work of Stanislav Grof. Others of you might not be. But this is Grof was a psychiatrist and a researcher, and he and his wife Christina coined this term spiritual emergency. And so this is about we emerge, we awaken out of the emergency. So out of the crisis, we kind of have this shift in consciousness, this awakening of consciousness. And I think for a lot of people, this process of awakening, with kind of doing the work, our personal development, our spiritual development, it can be a gradual process, and that we're able to integrate as we go along. Now, what happens with the crisis, with spiritual emergency, is that suddenly things kind of really speed up and get really intense, and it's we can't function at an everyday level. Okay, we cannot. It's just too overwhelming. And so, for me, at the age of 20, I ended up on a psychiatric ward when this first kicked off for me. I spent a month on an acute ward. And this is the thing about a spiritual crisis, spiritual emergence. It can look like mental health issues. Often there can be mental health issues wrapped up in there, because this is a complex relationship between the kind of the mysticism and the madness. So it can be very intense and certainly kind of really speed up. But there's definitely, you've already mentioned the word gift. There are definitely gifts in here. Now, when we're in crisis at the time, it's very difficult to see that. Certainly when I ended up on the psychiatric ward, it's like my kind of life fell apart. I was a student at the time. I lost a year of my life. I spent most of the following year kind of in bed, kind of coming off the medication, the kind of heavy duty medication that I was put on. And there was nobody around me that had a sense that this could be an opportunity for healing and growth. I had experiences which now I know we can call unitive states of consciousness, where you experience this incredible bliss and, inner peace, this kind of unbounded love. That's kind of what I was experiencing before I ended up in hospital. But unfortunately, I'm going back a long time now. I'm going back kind of like 35 years or more. Uh-huh. Mainstream psychiatry doesn't recognize the kind of, and even to this day, things are changing and improving, but there's still a lot of work to do in terms of mainstream kind of mental health. Now, some people go through spiritual emergency without ending up in the psychiatric system, and that's great. I think it depends on how much wounding we're carrying. I come from a pretty dysfunctional family, quite a wounded family. My father was an alcoholic, kind of high-functioning alcoholic, but even so, emotionally, psychologically, very abusive. And I just want to add a caveat there is that, he passed over to the other dimension many years ago, and I now have a fantastic relationship with him. It's kind of, I'm not a daily relationship. I don't have that much contact, but I do, I have healed my relationship with him. And I understand that, his behavior was because of his wounding and how that gets passed on down through the generations.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but this is the complexity of the issue is that, we start to awaken, we're given these opportunities for healing and for growth. And yet at the same time, like a volcano erupting, there's all this kind of molten lava and ash of our wounding that comes to the surface to be dealt with and addressed. And so I had a lot of work to do, at the time I didn't understand this. It was 20 years before I came back to this process, mm-hmm. because it was kind of really interrupted, kind of very abruptly and traumatically by ending up in hospital. And then 20 years later, I kind of revisited. I found myself in crisis again. This time I was in Egypt with my then spiritual teacher, and there was still work to do, and things kicked off, and it was very intense. I ended up, my legs gave way. Even though physically there was nothing wrong with me, my legs gave way, and I had to use a wheelchair for a few days. So yeah, that was pretty full on. And without going into the detail of that, and actually on my YouTube channel and my books and things, people can find more detail of the story, because I want to get to these issues of kind of some of the defining features and characteristics of these kinds of crises. Because what I want to show is how what we're now going through is the global equivalent. What we're now going through is the planetary equivalent of the personal. So let me speak a little bit to some of these kind of defining features. I've already mentioned the intensity of it. Yeah. Now I think everybody will agree that the pandemic, what we've been going through, has been phenomenally intense. It also, we can find ourselves, when we go through these experiences at the personal level, we can find ourselves catapulted into them really suddenly, like kind of overnight, just the speed at which things start to unravel. And again, I think we can see this, with the pandemic. One moment we were kind of all pretty much kind of going to work, the kids were going to school, we were socializing, and then suddenly, kind of almost overnight, we're in kind of full lockdown. And so this is, another parallel between how the process works at the personal and the planetary. It's like they mirror each other. You've got the micro at the individual level, and then you've got the macro at the collective level. Another feature is fear. When we go through these experiences at the personal level, it's terrifying. It's kind of like, we think we're going mad. We think we think we're going to die. Very often, we actually fear for our physical lives because we're so identified with our egos. The ego feels so threatened by the awakening of consciousness that we actually think that we're going to physically die. And I think, this kind of abject terror, I think, again, you can relate to this. And I think, everybody, those of you listening will relate to this. There's been a huge amount of fear flowing around the world. Just a lot of anxiety, fear.
Mm-hmm. Fear of death. Yes.
Yeah, and the fear of death, quite literally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, because I've been kind of working at the personal level in this field of spiritual emergency for the last 15 years, and yet, I've always been aware. Even when I kind of did my first book, which was kind of like 10 years ago now, I was aware of the parallels between the personal and the planetary. I could already see how the process was working at the two levels, and so this is. And then when the pandemic kicked off, I thought, oh my goodness, this because we've been in a global emergency for some time, Joan. It's not like it's just the pandemic. We've been in a climate crisis for decades, really.
Yeah. We are in and will be in a crisis over that for a while. Yeah.
And it's just that we haven't woken up to it. And in terms of the hero's journey, because this is a model that's very helpful for understanding this process and the dynamic. One of the early stages of the hero's journey is refusal of the call. There's this call to adventure, this call to shift and wake up, and then we refuse. And this is what humanity has done for decades around the climate. We've just refused to hear it. And that is now changing, thank goodness. And in fact, the pandemic has been hugely helpful. That's one of the gifts of this difficult time. Yeah.
Yeah, we can see the effects of what we've done to the environment, because as soon as we stopped everything, all the animals kept coming back, things started to flourish. Yeah, huge effect.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how quickly nature started to rejuvenate once we stopped all up. Yeah. So these are kind of, these are just some. I'm just touching on some of the key features, really, of these kind of parallels. So that people can see, hopefully people can see that, because I know, even a couple of weeks ago, I think you had Starhawk on your show, who was, she was very much talking about this awakening, this shift.
Maya,
and so, Maya, and so what I'm hoping people, starting to make sense to people as I'm speaking, is that this is a process that we know. We know how this process works at the personal level. Some of us have been studying this for a long time and been working with it for a long time. So we understand. And I think, the beauty of it is that those of us who've been through it at the personal level, and there's now a huge international community, because when I first started working in this field, we couldn't really talk of a spiritual emergency community. It's like people hadn't heard the term, there weren't many resources or books or support groups. Now there's a lot out there. And so, those of us that have been through this, we can recognize what's happening at the global level, but more than that, we can actually trust what is happening at the global level, because we've been through it and we've seen the good and the gifts and the opportunity. We've seen how our lives have kind of improved, and how we've kind of really shifted. I mean, my life has changed beyond recognition as a result of what I've been through. And it's not an easy journey. I don't want to gloss over, what we are dealing with the pandemic is not easy. It's very, very challenging and very, very painful. And yet, and I know I'm kind of reiterating what other guests have been saying on your show, that this is where we're heading. So to just come back to what I was saying, those of us that have been through it, we can trust the process, we can understand the process, and we can also step up to act as kind of guides and elders in some way, for the bigger process. And in fact, I've been working with some senior colleagues in the field. We've been working on a project of an open letter that is going to be going out, more publicly, just to help those who don't understand this process, to kind of help them reframe, because I haven't actually really experienced fear and anxiety during this whole pandemic, because I've been able to understand and reframe what's happening. I have touched into grief at times, because it's touched, I guess, on some personal level. Some of the huge grief in the world has touched me. But I think, when we can see the bigger picture, it makes it so much easier to cope with.
Yes.
So this is some of what I'm, wanting to offer and to help people with, really. So I think that's maybe enough. I think I've made my point about the relationship between spiritual emergency at the personal level and the planetary level. This is what we're going through.
Can you liken your spiritual emergency to a dark night of the soul? Because you do use the term the dark night of the globe, instead of we're collectively going through a dark night of the soul.
I think the dark night of the soul is a very particular kind of spiritual crisis. Often it can be associated with depression, or what feels like depression, or what looks like depression, because typically people can, at the personal level, can feel kind of abandoned by God, or kind of just really feel that they've lost their way on their spiritual path and that there's no hope. And so I think, when we look at the global level, I think a lot of people with the climate crisis kind of collapse into that place of no hope. I personally don't, because I feel very excited by what is happening in terms of the opportunity, and I can see our way forward. I can see a very clear path forward of how we can turn things around and turn the world around. And this is the work that I'm now kind of delivering and to groups. But I know that a lot of people have find it very difficult. So there are certainly these kind of parallels. I think I'd like to speak briefly to how we move through it at the personal level, because this will then help people to see how we can move through it at the at the planetary level. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I identified in my first book, in particular, in case of spiritual emergency, is really kind of structured around these three key phases of moving successfully through our awakening, through the crisis of awakening. So the first stage is where we just get through the worst of the crisis as best we can. We stay safe. We do our best to stay safe, and that's kind of it, really. We're kind of really focused on just solving the crisis. We're very much in emergency mode, kind of solving. Everything is, all our energy goes to, like, how do I get through this? And I think we can see that with the pandemic. It's like, especially when it all first kicked off, it's like, oh my goodness, how do we stay safe? How do we help other people stay safe? How can we get through this as best we can? And that, I think, is still ongoing, especially as the second wave. I'm in Spain. I kind of live in Catalonia, a couple of hours south of Barcelona. And, we're kind of seeing a second wave now. We're seeing a resurgence. And in fact, we have more cases in where I am. I'm not near any big cities, so we had very few cases first time round. And this second time round, there are more cases in my immediate area. And talking with a colleague in Australia, she was telling me that with the Spanish flu, it was actually the third wave that really hit Australia very severely, very badly in terms of the level of deaths. So, we are still in this first phase of just how do we get through this? How do we stay safe? Yeah. Now, I should also mention that these three key phases, it's not a linear process. We can move in and out of them, and they can overlap.
Mm-hmm.
So the second phase is like, well, what was that all about? What on earth was that all about? How can we start to make sense of it? How can we even begin to integrate it? Yeah, because it creates such an enormous shift. I think with the pandemic, we can see, there's going to be no going back to how life was before. That's just not going to happen.
That's right.
For people who think, yeah, and you get that. And I know, that your listeners get that too. And we wouldn't want to be honest, because it would mean that we'd learned nothing. But I think, by the very nature of the pandemic and the lockdown, by its very nature, we have been given an opportunity to have time to reflect. And some of us have been incredibly busy. I've been incredibly busy during the lockdown and the pandemic. But, for some people, it's given us an opportunity for quiet time, for reflection, for just rethinking our priorities. People are starting to feel called to maybe grow their own food, their vegetables. Maybe they're realizing that they don't want to be traveling anymore so much, or maybe not at all. Or they're feeling called to just simplify their lives right down to kind of just what really matters. So our priorities change, and we get to realize, what does really matter. So this is the second phase. The second phase is kind of beginning to make sense of it, beginning to integrate it. And I would say that is almost happening to some extent simultaneously with the first phase in this.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, for me, when I was in crisis the second time, after Egypt, I had to take a couple of months off work because I was so kind of thrown by it. But I certainly didn't end up in a psychiatric hospital or on medication this time around because I had the right support, because it's all about support, and having the right information, to be honest, as well. But what I did do was, after having a couple of months off work, I went back to the job I was doing. I completed the project I was working on, and then I left. I left that 9-to-5 job, and I have to say I've never looked back. That was something like 17 years ago. But what I did, Joan, was I took myself off on retreat for 2 months. Now, I had never been on retreat for that long in my life. I'd been on retreat for like a week at a time. I went on retreat for 2 months just to give myself the chance to take in the enormity of what I had been through. And just how my life was going to need to completely change direction, and how on earth did I even begin to do that? And so those 2 months were really incredibly valuable. So this is kind of collectively, this is kind of where we're at. And I know you get that. And then the final phase, and this for me is kind of, this is the exciting phase in terms of, I mentioned that I can see a really clear way forward. I can see how we can turn things around for the world, and how we can kind of really step into this awakening, so that it's not just a kind of nice idea, but it's actually a reality for our day-to-day lives and our communities and our nations. So the third phase, I call it going back out into the world. Okay, and it's where so after my 2 months of retreat, I then, I started organizing conferences on spiritual emergency. I set up the not-for-profit. I wrote my first book, and I really stepped up and out into the world, because I hadn't had any kind of visibility publicly before that. And so this is, when the time is ready, and already to some extent, I think actually, the third phase is already starting to happen collectively, globally, to some extent, but it's happening on Zoom. It's not like we're physically going back out.
Right, yeah.
We're kind of
virtual.
On Zoom. Yeah, but on Zoom, we are starting to organize. We are starting to create new things. You look at the Black Lives Matter movement, we are shifting. We're going places, but it's kind of all happening on Zoom. But that is, that's not to be underestimated, because it's kind of really connecting us.
Yes, we're connecting with even more people than we could if we did it in person, physically.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's in hyperdrive now.
It is. It is, and this is the intensity. This is the intensity of the process that I spoke about earlier, Joan. It's intense, and it's good. And I know you were talking about the astrology. It is going to get even more intense.
Yes.
This the second half of the year, and we can see that. With the presidential election in America. In the UK, we've got Brexit. Looming. And then other stuff in Europe. And the thing is, I don't want to be so kind of Euro and American centric. In the world
it's all
as well.
Over the world.
Well, it is, and there's a horrendous locust situation, and potentially huge famine sweeping across, the kind of Africa, India. This is and I hope that doesn't get eclipsed by our small kind of local concerns about the kind of the Brexit and the presidential election, because actually, this is going to require such a huge humanitarian response. Really.
Yes, we all need to come
But
together.
we know what the media, we know what happens with mainstream media, and I really encourage people to tap into non-mainstream media. Follow Democracy Now. Follow any kind of independent media. So I was speaking to,
I was just going to say that what you were saying about going back out into the world, it reminded me of the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I don't know if you remember that, long time ago, but, and it was a parable about what happens in our spiritual lives, that we go to, the place on the mountain, we learn all these lessons, and then it's for us to go back out into the world. And my own story was, okay, Jonathan, it's time for you to go back out into the world, And I'm like, yes, she's right. I mean, I can see how all these 3 steps, and you're right, they do kind of intertwine in my life when I went through my own awakening. Yes. So I just wanted to bring that out. I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love the Jonathan.
Yeah. Yep.
Great. Yeah. And it is, and you see, and this is, this is our work now, and this is, I have, since the beginning of the pandemic, Joan, and I can feel myself almost kind of getting a little bit emotional here, because I have really stepped up and stepped out since the beginning of the pandemic, because, I feel so called right now. For a number of years, I was kind of on track, but, now I just feel totally and utterly called to do the work that I'm doing, which is kind of really helping other people, because I kind of worked out this process. I worked out for myself, how do I make sense of my crisis, integrate it, and then how do I go back out into the world? And I spent the last 15 years working out, how to go back out into the world in a way that can have a positive impact and kind of really help reduce suffering and contribute to the awakening of consciousness. And so now, because I actually had a vision, and I can feel myself getting animated here as I'm talking about it. But, when I was in crisis, that time, in Egypt, the 2003 crisis, the Egypt crisis, I had a vision. And this vision, it sat with me for 17 years, and I feel that I'm only just stepping into it now. And I didn't fully understand, these visions, they can be a little bit difficult to grasp. Basically, I saw the awakening of consciousness. I saw this huge shift in humanity. I saw the ascension of humanity, but I struggle a bit with the word ascension. I kind of tend to try to kind of avoid using it. I think more in terms of awakening of consciousness, a shift of consciousness. But I saw this, but I also saw vast numbers of souls leaving the planet all at the same time, And this, I have to confess that it was an ecstatic vision. I know on the one hand you feel the pain of that, because obviously, there's huge numbers of people, dying with this pandemic. And yet what I saw was also, from spirit's perspective, from the other side, there's just this huge rejoicing. It was an ecstatic vision of all these souls kind of ascent, going up to the light all at once. It was incredible. But it's obviously, I think, I can only feel comfortable sharing that with your audience, with everybody that's listening now, because I know that they're aligned with this kind of thinking that, when we pass into the other realm, it's just a continuation. I know death is painful for those left behind, but for those that move on, it's kind of so yeah. Now I've kind of lost my thread a little bit of what because I get so excited. But yeah, in terms of this process that I've developed, I've worked out this kind of so I kind of broke it down. I kind of worked out, so how have I been doing this? How have I managed to get a book published when everybody was telling me how impossible it is to find a publisher? When I had no, I had nothing previously published. I think I had one article out there. Setting up and setting up a not-for-profit. I've never done anything like that in my life. I'd never organized a conference in my life. How did I actually do this? And so I kind of identified this kind of a process. And recently I was speaking with a colleague who is kind of in kind of consultancy, kind of like management consultancy. And I was sharing this process with him. He was saying, it's actually very similar to in the enterprise sector, how when they're managing a change and transition and transformation, it's kind of a similar sort of process, except of course I'm coming at it from a much more spiritual, transpersonal way and languaging it in a very different way. But essentially, you know, we start with the kind of getting clear about what we feel called to, and just the kind of just really clarifying, because our priorities change, and you know, we've seen this already with the pandemic. So there's a process there of kind of getting clear and then actually really expressing our intention, you know, really looking at the language of how we're expressing our intention. Because if we want to co-create with Source, which is co-creating with Source is the way to go, because it's so effortless in comparison with just trying to create from a lower level. So that's definitely the way to go. And I've actually called this process the quantum quest, because it's all about stepping into the quantum field and using the quantum energy. You know, we now have physics explaining, you know, how this works. And I don't pretend to understand the science by any means. But I do know that when we work at this level, it's very powerful. And it's kind of how I've kind of turned a crisis into opportunity. So there's getting clear about what we feel called to. There's also the inner work, because, you know, it's all about vibration. You know, if we're working in the quantum field, it's all about energy and kind of understanding a little bit about the science of vibrational energy. And then, and this is the bit where I get really excited, it's the prototyping. It's like, now this is what the Presencing Institute calls prototyping. We can think of it as a pilot. We can think of it as a mini version of whatever it is that we want to do. So, for example, when I felt so called to write my first book, I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? You know, I have no publishing experience. I thought, well, I'll write an article and I'll see if I can get an article published, you know, and that's a kind of mini version. It's like I'm getting one little piece out there in the public domain published, and so that's just a little example of how we create a very small version of what it is we feel called to, so that it becomes manageable, so that it's not overwhelming and really scary, but also so that we can start to engage with the energy. Because once we do that and we feel how passionate it makes us feel, and we kind of feel the motivation, you know, then that helps us also to cut through some of the fear and the resistance, to step into something that's maybe, you know, a bigger calling.
Yes, I think a lot of people are there right now, at least in the spiritual community, that we're all being called to do what we really came here to do, and our work is changing a lot now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great that you've noticed that and that people are feeling that. And then also that can leave a little bit of a kind of uncertainty. It's like, so what shape does it need to take? What exactly is my piece of the jigsaw puzzle? And you know, and I got very clear, you know, kind of last year, before the pandemic even struck, actually, I was already feeling called to work with groups. I've got a lot of teaching experience. You know, over the years, I've done a lot of teaching, and you know, whether it was teaching mindfulness or you know, when I was working full time teaching at university, and so I realized that, you know, because I'm kind of like one individual in terms of wanting, you know, feeling called to have as big a positive impact as I possibly can on the awakening of consciousness. It's like, okay, so how am I going to scale that? Well, if I'm supporting other people who are in leadership positions, or, you know, in some way, you know, working with groups, you know, or even just individuals, you know, anybody that is feeling called to step up, if I can support them and give them a kind of tried and tested method, then effectively I can scale. I can scale the contribution that I can make and the impact, the positive impact I can have just by supporting others to do what they feel called to do. So you know, I think this is, yeah. I mean, it's it's very exciting. And sorry, I hope I'm not rambling on, because I am feeling so passionate about this now. And it's been a few years since I've been feeling so kind of engaged. So it's great.
Well, it's refreshing because we haven't felt this energy for a while, in general, globally, because of the pandemic. There's been this heaviness, and now I agree. Mars is in Aries, so we're going to have this fiery, it's time to start moving, type of energy. Yeah.
So hopefully I've kind of showed, some clear steps for how we go, from crisis to what we're feeling called to. Maybe now would be a good time for me to just share, Joan, if that's okay, about a workshop that I've got coming up. Because I think if what I've been talking about has been resonating with those of you that are listening, then I think this workshop is going to be of interest. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine.
Great. So the workshop I've got coming up, it's on Saturday, the 5th of September, and it's now the timings. It's going to be pretty early in the morning Pacific. I think it's something like 8 a.m. Pacific. So that's hopefully that's going to work for people on both coasts. And basically, what I really want to help people to do in the workshop is to start getting clear about, how your priorities have changed, as a result of the pandemic or as a result of personal crisis. Could be either, and the two can be related. So, how, just to kind of start getting clear about that. And, so looking at how our priorities have changed and what to do about that. Yeah. And then I kind of also want to help people bust some of the myths around our callings. Because, sometimes we have some kind of ideas, some myths about callings, which can maybe kind of not be very helpful. They can kind of block us a little bit. And so I kind of want to address that. So there's kind of, with the workshop, there's an element of teaching input, but there's also an element of kind of really sharing and exploring. I'm keeping the group really small. It's literally just 12 people, because I want everybody to have a chance to kind of really share and kind of have some time. Mm-hmm. And then I also want to go into a bit more detail about this process that I've developed, just to give people a bit more guidance of how how the process works, kind of to get from A to Z, from crisis to calling. So, but what I've done is I've included in the price of the ticket, I've included a complimentary, totally free session with myself. So it's 45 minutes one-to-one with me, because I really see how people need it when they're trying to get clear about their priorities and what they're feeling called to, and how on earth to bring that into form.
Right.
Then the one-to-one time is really helpful. And I will, I do also want to share, if people are interested in possibly working with me, there'll be a little bit of an opportunity to explore how I could support them further. But what I wanted to offer specifically for your listeners and your listeners alone, Joan, is basically I've discounted the ticket price. So it's $30. It's in pounds, but it's roughly $30, and I've discounted it to $20 just for your listeners. So what they'll need, what you'll all need to put in, but you'll probably, because there's only 12 places, you might have to be quick if this really resonates.
Really quick. Do it now. Don't wait.
So the promotional code for you to get that discount is gift. So if you just type in the word gift, you'll get the discount. That's the promo code, just the word gift. Because we've been talking today about, how to harvest the gifts.
Gifts. It
from
started
crisis.
with gifts. Yeah.
So so it felt like a good term to use.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, and I'm excited
I think that's
to be
very
offering that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. I hope so. And actually, I'll see. I think I hopefully people will communicate with me if they wanted to book on a place and they couldn't because it's such a small group. Then do email me, because if enough people want me to run it again, then I will. But again, just keeping the numbers
great.
small.
Yeah, I feel that's very timely. And as a matter of fact, I feel like I'm changing my own work. So,
I'm
I've
sure.
been feeling like everything's gonna. Yep. Okay. The old website's gonna go. I'm in the process of redoing everything. So it's very timely. Yeah.
Good. That sounds good, Joan. That sounds it gives you kind of fresh energy for moving forward, doesn't it?
Yeah, the old is gone. And I wrote an article about 2020 in Edge magazine before 2020 started, and I called it the year of unprecedented change. And little did I know that all of this was going to happen. I mean, I didn't predict that. And I did say we're closing not the chapter, but the book on our lives. So I really feel that 2020 will be a demarcation in our lives. It's like BC and AD, you know what I mean? Before 2020 and after 2020, and nothing is going to be the same. And actually what I'm seeing as part of my work is helping people, whether it's personally or in relationships or even in business, to restructure their lives and to rethink things and to transform according to the newer energies. So, yeah.
Absolutely, Jane. We are so aligned. We are so thinking the same way, which is fabulous. And I think we need to give ourselves credit. On one level, you didn't know what was coming, but I guess on a soul level, that's why you wrote that article. Because, I did almost exactly the same thing. It's making me laugh because I put out a YouTube video on New Year's Eve. It was kind of like a New Year's message. And the title of it, and in fact, maybe you don't want to go and watch it, but the title of it was "Fasten Your Seatbelts for 2020." So do you use the term seatbelt in American English? Like when you're in the car?
Yes.
It's a seatbelt.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
so I said, fasten your seatbelts. And
on
one level, I didn't know what was coming, like you. But on another level, I guess on a soul level,
we all
knew.
On a soul level, we knew.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is the time, and all I can say to people is, this is it.
Yeah. And I think also, Joan, the next decade, it's like this. I totally hear what you're saying, and I totally agree with you about this year. It's like AD and BC and AD, but then I think this next decade is going to be crucial. How we step up and show up in the next decade is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
So this is our work. This is why we're here. We chose to be here at this time.
Yes, we did, and we have to keep reminding ourselves of that. Well, you chose this, and really, 2020 is also about, as Jude and I always really drill in everybody's heads. It's really about self-empowerment this year. Yeah. It's really the theme, and so part of being self-empowered is also to accept responsibility for your life and your choosings and what you've created. So, okay. I asked for this. I asked for coming.
And I really, I really get that self-empowerment. That's what I'm wanting to do. I'm wanting to really kind of show people this process so that then they can use it and they can iterate it and just keep on stepping up more and more with this kind of process, which in a sense, it's not like we just do it once. It's kind of like a spiral,
Everything
kind of spiral back around.
Everything does.
I can see that I've used it over and over when I kind of break it down and kind of analyze it now. And I've made some of the main mistakes as well. I think that's partly why I've kind of get it and feel ready to kind of really offer it to others, because there are some key mistakes that we make along the way. If we don't if we don't know any better. And so I can help people to do it quicker and more easily.
Yeah,
because I've
without
made
the
the
cosmic
mistake. It's
2
like,
by
this
4.
is what not to do.
That cosmic 2 by 4. I've had that before. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And everything is accelerated right now, and everything I say has a short shelf life. And for people going through all this, I can only imagine because, excuse me, I've had the luxury of years of going through this change, and people now are going through it very rapidly. So be gentle with yourselves and just
absolutely, Joan. And there are a lot of resources out there. I really want to encourage people to reach out to the resources out there. There's the in the UK there's the Spiritual Crisis Network. In Canada there's a Spiritual Emergence Service. In the States there's the Spiritual Emergence Network. They all have slightly different names, but if you start Googling spiritual emergency, if you haven't heard this term before, you'll find a lot of support, a lot of initiatives.
Well, that's wonderful. Is there anything else you want to share with us today, Catherine?
No, I think that's it really. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I feel I've kind of really hopefully given people something that's going to be really helpful and valuable. And I'm really excited about the workshop as well, because I feel that I can give more value and kind of support people and help people more in that more intimate kind of setting. So I think maybe my YouTube channel, if people want to go and look at that, so it's YouTube /user/Catherine G. Lucas. Hopefully I've got that right. I'm just trying to remember it.
Yes, you have. I'm looking at it right now. And where can they go to sign up for this class?
Yes, that's a very good, I just forget the most essential bit. Yeah. So that's on Eventbrite. Okay, probably people are familiar with Eventbrite, and I've actually called it the same title as today's show, Harvest the Gifts from Crisis. So they should be able to find it there. And if not, just drop me an email, Catherine@catherineglucas.com. And I'm also working on a new website that, so that's, the new website is co-creatingourfuture.world. So that's in its infancy, but, I'm still excited with how it's shaping up. So it's looking good.
Yeah, and your current website is Catherine-G-Lucas.com. So if people are looking for that, there's dashes in there, just so.
Yeah. Thank you, Joan. I think it might come up without the dashes as well, but it's good to be sure. Yeah. Fantastic. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, I have too. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Catherine.
You're very welcome. I hope to come back again, maybe.
I was going to say, yes, as we keep spiraling and changing and going up here. When things change, you need to come back on. Just, email me. Love to have you back.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And we've come to the end of another show. Thank you so much, Catherine, for being on today and helping us to understand what many of us are going through right now. And to help us understand what's coming up next month in the energy of September, of course, is our resident astrologer, Jude Valentine. She'll be here next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, to talk about the astrology of September 2020. And we have Mars going retrograde on 9/9, just to give you a little preview. Yes, you'll want to tune in and find out what's going to happen next month. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I wish you well on this Tuesday, and much love, everyone. Take care.